Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Natural History Museum. My name is David and I'm your host for today's Nature Live, which is a bit of a special one at our Lates, which the theme, if those of you haven't quite worked it out, is Call of Nature. That doesn't mean animals going to the toilet. We're talking about sounds and noises in the animal kingdom. Now, just before we kick off, just to let you know, there's no eating or drinking in the studio, I'm afraid. And can I ask that we have mobile phones either turned off or put on silent. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show. It's going to last about 45 minutes. Nature Lives are our sort of chance to put scientists and content and science out front and centre. Normally our own museum scientists at the museum. We've got around 300 scientists that work on our collection of around 80 million specimens. So there's lots of work to be done, but we occasionally like to invite some external scientists to the museum to tell us a little bit about what they've been up to. And today I'm delighted to invite Tom August and Tom Moore to talk to us today about Ears in the Sky. And in case you haven't guessed what it's about, we're going to be talking about bats. This is your chance to find out a little bit more about these subjects, so please don't be shy. Stick your hand up if you've got a question, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Anyway, that's enough from me. Guys, thank you ever so much for coming down and joining us. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about what it is that you do and why you're so interested in bats. We'll start with you, Tom.
So, well, what's there not to be excited about bats? You know, bats are, I think, the most charismatic group of animals that there are. They live on the edge of existence. They're a flying mammal, so they use a huge amount of energy to move around, and they're tiny, so they have to eat tons and tons of insects a night to stay alive. They can navigate in complete darkness. There are bats that drink blood. I mean, as soon as I learnt about bats during my undergraduate, I thought, this is a taxonomic group that I can get behind.
Was that the moment? Was there one sort of moment during your university degree where you thought, you know, I'm a bat man?
Yeah, you're not the first. Not the first to have said that one. So I took a funny note actually. I did my PhD at Wytham Woods outside Oxford, and there's a family who lived in a little chalet in the middle of the woods. So I used to walk up and down past their house every day, going about doing my research on bats. And one time I walked past, and the kid was there, and he had about 10 of his mates around him, and they were playing on their BMXs. And he turned to the others and he kind of whispered, and I kept on walking. And then they all turned around and went, no, 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 no. So yeah, I get a lot of that. But yeah, this is
you love it though, don't you?
Yeah, maybe. So this is Wytham where I did my research. So I spent 4 years there studying bats and their social structure and all sorts of things. So this is a map of their social structure. But yeah, like I said, once I first started studying them, there's just more and more you learn about them, the more fascinating that they are.
Fantastic. And Tom M, we're going to go with Tom M and Tom A. When did you first become interested in bats? Is that something that you're working on now? Or?
No, it's not part of my day job at all. I work in property, my background's in chemistry, so it's completely unrelated. But I guess I became interested in bats when Tom and I had a conversation, I think we might discuss a little bit later, at a wedding when we were under the influence. And that kind of kicked off a bit of our project, which I think we're going to talk about later.
Excellent. Well, we don't want to give away that bit of the story. But let's first, Tom A. Let's look at some myths, because there's lots. They get a bit of a bad rep, bats. So let's first of all, straight off the bat, let's get rid of some of these myths. So I'm going to open it up to the audience to see is anything that you you think about bats, and let's see if it's actually true. Anyone got a question about bats at all? This is your chance to speak to an expert. Yes, in the middle.
Do all bats have poor eyesight, or is that just me?
Yeah,
Are bats blind? Bats aren't blind. In fact, things like flying foxes, fruit bats use sight as their primary means of navigation and finding their food. Bats in the UK do have very small eyes, and they fly around mainly at night, so they use echolocation to navigate. So that's using ultrasound, sound waves bouncing off, hearing the echoes to see what's around them. But they do still use their eyes, so it is a myth that bats are blind. All bats use sight.
Good, that's a good strong one to start with. Anyone else got a question or a myth we can get rid of straight off the bat? Yes?
So is it true that bats that eat insects have more developed hearing because they need echolocation in a way that bats that eat fruit, for example, don't?
So it's different. So the bats that eat insects have better echolocation. So it's true that bats that eat insects need very good echolocation because they need to be able to track an insect that's moving through the air in complete darkness. It's not true that bats that eat fruit don't have echolocation. They also use echolocation. And in fact, there are some bats that drink nectar for whom echolocation is very important. So these bats that drink nectar, they often co-evolve with the flower. So the flower needs the bats for pollination. The bats need the flower for nectar. And so the plant has evolved in such a way that has a sort of trumpet shape. That means when a bat echolocates, the sound gets focused in a beam back to its origin. So it would be like us sort of walking down the street and someone shining a flash torch at you from across the street. So yes, insectivorous bats, so bats that eat insects, have better echolocation, but fruit bats use it too.
Let's get right onto another one. Do they fly into your hair, Tom?
So there's a nice little story attached to this. In the 1800s, there was a landed gentry lord who wanted to dispel the myth that bats would get stuck in long hair, like my luscious hair. So he got 2 young maidens from the village up to his house, and he had some bats, and he threw these bats at their hair, and none of them got stuck, thus proving that bats do not get stuck in your hair.
I'm glad I got that sorted.
But I also think that he might have had ulterior motives for getting young maidens up to his manor, so maybe it was just a terrible chat-up line, I don't know.
Brilliant. Okay, we're just getting rid of these straight away. Has anyone got another question about bats? Anything that they think may or may not be true about bats? Yes, in the middle.
Is it true that they have lots of diseases?
Ah, good.
Yeah,
Are they
that's
full of disease?
Yeah, that's a really good one. So bats get a bit of a bad rap for this because some bats do carry rabies, and rabies is 100% fatal to humans. The Ebola outbreak also originated from bats. But this doesn't mean that bats are disease-ridden animals that we really need to be concerned about. The level of rabies in bats is very, very low. The reason these diseases tend to emerge from bats is that bats will live in structures where livestock live, and they'll pass the disease to livestock. So that's what happened with Ebola. They gave it to something called a palm civet, which is a bit like a badger in China. And these palm civets then pass the disease on to us. So the main way that we can combat that is to make sure that bats don't roost in dwellings where we are. Now, bats will often roost in people's houses and their lofts, but that's not really a problem because bats in the UK don't have these sorts of diseases, and they're separated from you anyway by your roof. I would say, just as a note of caution, that because there is some rabies in bats in the UK, we always say that if you do come across a grounded or wounded bat, wear a glove or use a towel or something to pick it up and put it outside. It's best not to pick it up with your bare hand, just in case it bites you.
And actually, on that note, there is an organisation, the Bat Conservation Trust, that run a helpline, especially at this time of year, or soon when we're starting to get baby bats. So if you do ever find a bat and aren't sure what to do, the Bat Conservation Trust have a helpline, and they can tell you, put you in touch with the nearest carer. There's hundreds of people all around the country that volunteer to look after tiny baby bats, which is
Bless them.
Absolutely. So bats and disease, yes, there is an association, but perhaps it's not as extreme as some people think, but they are positive as well. When you mention pollination, are there other things that bats do that perhaps are beneficial to us or the ecosystem?
Yeah, there's definitely a trend at the moment to try and say how valuable nature is in terms of its benefit to humans. Bats certainly are very beneficial to us, and the main thing is as a pest control. So they eat insects which would otherwise eat crops. And some guys in the States did some sort of crude maths and reckoned that bats were worth about $3 billion a year to the agricultural industry in the US alone. So that's the equivalent of twice the cost of the London Olympic Games every year, or 1,200 times the annual budget of NASA, which is both a ringing endorsement for how valuable bats are and a sad truth as to how poorly funded NASA is.
More bats, less rockets.
Yeah.
Not quite. Okay, well, we mentioned we looked at a few different bats. I've been putting them up on the screen as we've been talking about it. But how many species are there around the world? Do we know exactly?
So there's a bit of debate as to the actual number, but it's more than 1,100, and that's about a quarter of all mammal species. So this is a really, really diverse group of mammals, so really, really diverse. And the reason they are so diverse, and there's so many of them, is because they're a very ancient order of mammals. So they evolved a very long time ago. So they evolved around the time that dogs were evolving as dogs and cats were evolving as cats. They're very, very ancient. And over time, they've grown to fill lots of different niches. There's lots of different bat species, and they all behave in slightly different ways, and eat different things, and live in different places. And so because of this, we now have this huge diversity, which is really valuable.
And what about in the UK? How many bats? Actually, why don't we ask the audience? Does anyone know how many bat species there are in the UK? Different types of bats. Anyone all want to guess? Yes, very brave.
18 bat species, but 17
God,
It's a very,
A
very
star.
good guess.
A star. Wow, fantastic. Yeah, so 18 or 17, depending who you talk to. So there's one bat species which is present, but we don't think it's breeding, so some people would not count that. So 17 or 18.
And this is probably the one that most people would have seen, a common pipistrelle. But there's plenty more that people maybe never heard of. And I heard it was around a quarter of our mammal species are actually bats.
Yeah, so a quarter of all species. So the pipistrelle here, lives perfectly happy in urban areas, so that's why it's the one that a lot of people will have seen. They can also form really big roosts of up to sort of a few hundred, even 1,000 individuals in one roost. And these guys eat insects, and the best time to see them is just maybe around sunset. That's when they'll start to fly out of their roost, and you might still be able to see them against the light of the evening sky. Best viewed from a lounge chair with a gin and tonic around sunset.
Brilliant. We talked a little bit. We're going to get onto you in a minute.
That's fine.
I realise you're really nervous, but feel free to.
Tom's definitely our bat guy. Yeah,
I got this.
You mentioned echolocation. We briefly sort of touched on what it is. How are bats actually doing it, and is it always for the same reason? And are there different patterns? Are we able to identify a bat from the sort of echolocation?
So echolocation, I like to think, in terms of humans, is like standing in a dark room and setting off a strobe light. So just for that split second, you can see the world around you. So when a bat sends out an echolocation pulse of ultrasound, it goes out, bounces back, and for that instant, they can see what the world looks like. So when they're commuting from one place to another over, say, an open meadow, they'll send out very loud pulses quite infrequently. They'll go out, 'cause it doesn't need to see how the landscape's changing very much. It's not flying in between trees, it's just flying over an open space. If it sees an insect, then it now needs to start increasing the speed of its pulse, so like turning up the speed of that strobe light, because you need to be able to see where that insect's moving. So the calls get faster and faster and faster. And then they create what we call a feeding buzz. So the sound sort of goes tick, 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 and that sort of raspberry is where the echolocation calls are so fast after one another that we can't really tell them apart. So there's this sort of commuting call, which is sort of tick, 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 tick. There's the feeding buzz, this sort of noise. And then we've also got sort of social calls, which is when they're calling to one another. We don't really know what they're saying in these social calls, but they also sound different. So those are the sort of three different types of calls bats make. And then different bat species will they'll also make different sounds to one another, which, as you sort of alluded to, allows us to identify them by their calls.
And we've got a couple of different examples, which isn't the actual sound of the bat, because as you all know, we can't actually hear them within our range, which is just as well, because it sounds like they're just shouting like the whole time. But we are able to hear them with a bat detector. What exactly is the bat detector doing?
Yeah, so this is a little bat detector. It's got some microphones on the top, and it basically listens to ultrasound and then plays it out in audible sound, so that we can hear the noise that bats make. Because although bats are as loud as a sort of jackhammer or a jet engine, they're so high pitched we just can't pick it up ourselves.
We can test it. Has anyone got a pair of keys at all?
Right.
Wanna take
You all have a pair of keys.
Yeah.
Who's brave enough to take it out of their pocket
Didn't
and
think
jangle
it was
it?
that sort of night, did you? Okay. That's okay.
So jangle again at the back over there. Hear that? So jangling keys makes a really loud ultrasound. When you start using these in the landscape, you find all sorts of things make ultrasound which you didn't know did. Sort of grasshoppers make ultrasound. I spent about half an hour tracking down an electric fence once. So the sort of ticking noise as the electric pulse goes off. Rushing water makes quite a lot of ultrasound. And rubbing your fingers together makes a lot of ultrasound as well.
Well, let's hear some what bats sound like actually through a bat detector. Let's start with one, the common pipistrelle, which we mentioned before. I think we've got a recording of that. Would you guys recognise that straight away now if you heard it?
Oh, I don't think I would. No.
Maybe. I mean, it's because it's not only the sound, it's also the frequency, and that frequency often comes through as a digital readout. But yeah, so this is kind of bubbly. People describe it as bubbly, like bubbles in mud, which you might find hard to believe. Kind of tone to it.
Okay, let's compare that to a bigger species. What we've got the nocturnal bat up here. Is that got a similar call, or is that instantly sort of different?
So the nocturnal will sound different, and you guys should be able to pick up this one. So the frequency of this is much lower. So actually, young children can just about hear the call of a nocturnal, and it's kind of like a chip chop sound. So that sounds very different. I think it sounds a bit like a sort of jazz, kind of like a jazz drum.
A bit drummer bass as well.
Yeah, a bit of a jazz beat. So this is like 20, 23, 20 kilohertz, whereas the pipistrelle's about twice that, much higher.
So the frequency they're calling it, that's one of the ways that you can tell that they're doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Before we move on to the second part of our talk, has anyone got a question at all about anything they've heard about so far? Yes, in the middle.
In the reflection, are they mostly interested in the time that it takes to be reflected, or the amplitude of the reflection, or the frequency of the reflection? I mean, there's
So amplitude will tell them something about how far away it is. So if it's very loud coming back, then they hear something that's quite close to them. Ultrasound attenuates very quickly, which means its volume drops very quickly over distance. So the amplitude is going to tell them about its proximity, and then the order, or the time interval, and the direction is going to tell it about where things are. So if it takes a long time to come back and it's quiet, then it's far away. And if it's come from over here, then that thing that's far away is over here. If it's come back loud very quickly, then it's close. And if it's come from here, then it's in front of me.
so that they're not interested in the frequency content of the return.
No. So it kind of works like a same as a sonar from some reason.
Good question. We'll take one more and then we'll crack on, yes.
The bats make a very loud noise, but they listen for a very quiet noise. So how do their ears cope with the change?
So that's a good question. I believe I'm right in saying that there's a bone in the inner ear which disconnects when they make the noise, so they don't deafen themselves.
It's a nifty little trick.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any limitations though? Are there any times you think, oh, I wish I could hear those bats out there a little bit better?
Well, one of the problems we have with these bat detectors is that they're handheld, so they're limited to being on the ground, whereas bats are flying in the air. So, for example, if you're putting up some wind turbines are known to interact with a bat in a way that is not beneficial for a bat, because they can evade or hit bats. If you want to know what bats are doing up there, you're kind of limited because we're on the ground. So it would be great if we had some sort of tool.
Okay. Well, you guys came up with a nifty solution. Let's see what the answer to our problem is. Perhaps you guys can go and
Absolutely.
fetch it.
Happy to.
Now you have had a little bit more success. But Tom, let's bring you in here now. So I think we can most people hopefully identify these as types of drone. How did the drones and the bats idea merge? You alluded it to at the beginning.
So probably about 3 years ago, Tom and I met each other at university, and one of our other friends was getting married, and we were at the wedding, and a few beers, having a good time. And I just built my first drone, and it was a quadcopter that looks very much like this one, a bit smaller. And I said to Tom, I've just built this drone. And Tom said, oh, what would happen if you put a bat detector on that? Do you think that would work? And I had no idea. Happy to try it though. So off I headed over to Oxfordshire and put a bat detector on it. And no, it doesn't work.
So you woke up the next morning and you still thought it was worth a go though?
Yeah, that I guess is the acid test, isn't it? You know, the morning after, is it still a good idea? And it seemed like it was, which is why I headed out to Oxfordshire.
But you just thought we're just going to try it. We're going to have a go, stick a bat detector on
Yeah,
the drone and see what happens.
Yeah,
and what happened?
we didn't have any particular agenda with it. You know, we didn't know where we were going with it. We just thought this will be fun. Let's try it. And what happened is, it turns out that drones create lots of ultrasound. And that's a problem because if you can't hear your bats over your drone, then it's not going to be a very useful tool. So, so our high-tech solution to this was to take about a 5-meter bit of string and hang our detector on the bottom of this, which...
I think I've got video of that.
Oh, we might have a
Yeah,
bit
let's
there.
see how well that went.
So one point is that we were clever enough not to use an actual bat detector, and that we used a bottle with about 300 grams worth of water in. Yeah, so that wasn't particularly successful either. But we've kind of soldiered on, and we were contacted shortly after we put that video up on our page, our website, by a chap who makes lightweight bat detectors, which was a real sort of revolution for us, because that bat detector weighs about 300 grams, our drone weighs about 1 kilogram, and you get this huge oscillation, and it's just absolutely uncontrollable, and the drone goes one way, and it makes it worse by going the other way, then the string gets wrapped in the propellers, and down you go. So our lightweight detector was really sort of the breakthrough of the project, in that it only weighs about 100 grams. It's in fact this one right here, which I'll just whiz out for people. So this is the real stripped down version. It's basically just a circuit board with a little microphone on. That's right here. I'll leave that on the table and maybe we can focus on it.
And that really did make a difference, didn't it? Sort of a leap forward. But I mean, I feel like we've jumped a few steps.
Yeah, we probably have. I'm sorry.
And I
Yeah,
feel
got
a bit.
excited.
No. It's great. I feel a bit bad. We've just shown 2 videos and 2 crashes. Presumably there were enough successes. There was enough in this project for you to think, hang on, we've really got a good idea here. So the one issue that you found was the interference of sound. Was there anything else at all that wasn't quite going right, or little problems that you had to overcome?
Yeah, we had tons of problems. Yeah. So I didn't know how to fly any of this stuff before the project. So we had to learn how to fly essentially an RC plane, fly a quadcopter. One of the main problems that we had, and I guess now we're kind of developing these as a tool for bat researchers or people who work with bats, maybe in consultancies, is that they don't fly for very long. So the quadcopter that we had before flew for between 8 and 10 minutes, which isn't going to get you lots of bat data. So we wanted to overcome that, and we initially tried using planes because they can fly for a lot longer. You know, the way that they generate lift is through their wings moving through the air. So this was our first plane.
That's what it looks like when it's in one piece.
Yeah, it's quite an unusual sight for us. I don't know if you've got any photos of later on, but later on that plane was absolutely covered in duct tape, which about doubled the weight of it, which was holding it all together. Oh, there we go.
That's
yeah.
it, yeah.
That's a common sight for us. Yeah. So our weekends, probably 2 years ago, were spent when we got together. We would do a test flight. The plane would invariably land in multiple pieces. We'd then glue it back together, and that would take a couple of days.
But did it, presumably there was, you know, you did actually achieve, you know, you were able to hear bats.
Yeah.
Higher up. When was the point where you first actually sort of got the moment where you put a bat detector on one of these drones and then you recorded some bat calls?
The very first time that we're pretty sure that we recorded a bat call was probably a couple of years ago. It was from the plane that you've just seen in the image, and it was a very weak call. So if we see here, so it's about 45 kilohertz, which ties in with a common pipistrelle, but there's all of that noise, which is noise from the propeller. One interesting aside from this that I quite like is that you can actually tell what revolutions per minute the propeller's doing, because each of those little pips, because you've got such a good time resolution on the detector, each of those little pips is when the propeller goes round once it gets there next to the detector.
So how many revolutions have we got here?
I think I worked it out. I think it's about 3,000.
Well, Well done. Has anyone got any questions at all about drones? I mean, there's lots to ask. I've got lots of questions, but have you guys perhaps about drones or even about the project itself? Oh, thank you. I didn't see. Yes.
So in the same way that a mobile phone has got multiple microphones and can cancel out background sounds, have you considered trying that with your drones?
Yeah, we have, and it's something that the chap who gave us this detector has been working on that, and it's very difficult to do in an analog fashion because of the frequency of the sound that we're trying to cancel out. And if you move that relative to the propeller, which is our source of interference, even a few millimeters, and it is constantly moving in flight, then it becomes absolutely useless. He thinks there's a way to digitally cancel it, but he's kind of working on that in the background. So yes, there should be potential.
Good question. Anyone else got a question at all? We'll go to the back and then we'll take yours at the front. Yes.
What's the importance of getting the detector up in the air?
What's the important? Yeah, good question. Okay, so what's the importance of getting the bat detector up in the air? What are the limitations that you've got down on the ground?
That's a really good question. So the importance of getting the detector in the air is that it enables us potentially to do things easier than we can right now. So one of the main ways of surveying bats is through a transect survey, where you walk along a particular route, and if you can send a drone along that route, you don't have to send a person, which is potentially useful, although maybe not the main use. You can take drones where you can't put people, so maybe into a dangerous area, maybe it's all scrubland and it's just difficult to get across. You could fly a drone over that. You take drones to heights that people can't get to easily. So for example, Tom mentioned the wind turbines, that would be a really good one. So there may be, so you can detect bats, within about 20 to 30 meters of the detector. So if you're looking 30 meters up, about 100 feet, wind turbines go up to about 130 meters, so probably about 400 feet, and you're allowed to fly drones up to 400 feet. So there might be different bats at 100 feet than there are at 400 feet, but we just don't know which species are up there. And then potentially over things like forest canopy. There's been no work done over forest canopies, see what bats are flying over there. Out over water, we know that bats migrate across the English Channel, for example. We don't know the routes that they take, we don't know, do we know what species are doing that?
Yeah, we do.
Presumably we do.
Thesis pipistrelle, for example, you can get species in.
There's huge amounts of data which are previously are still completely unknown about bats, and this is an exciting way that we can find out about it. I've got one obvious problem which I'm sure you've considered. Bats tend to come out when it gets quite dark. Even the best pilot is going to struggle flying one of these when it's 100 meters away and it's pitch black. How have you
Absolutely.
overcome that problem? I'm sure you've already thought of it.
So happily, we do the initial part of the flying, the takeoff, and the landing, and then when we're doing an actual survey, the plane is flying. You can think of it as autonomously or in a highly automated fashion, which is to say that what we do is we have a computer with us that has an interface with Google Maps on it. All we do is click some waypoints that we'd like the plane to go at, so that sets an X and Y coordinate, and then we give it an altitude, and kind of off it goes on its merry way. And you can send it round that loop as many times as you like.
So you can program exactly where you want it to go,
Yeah,
and then it goes and does it.
So this image, for example, is taken from the autopilot that was on this plane, and the sort of grey boxy line are the waypoints that we've given it, and the pink line is its actual trajectory. So that's
It's a
taken
bit
down.
rogue, this one, is it? Or is that that's pretty?
yeah,
It's not bad, is it?
Yeah, we need to tighten up on the corners, I think. Yeah, there's a bit of work we can
That's
do.
not bad, and presumably that potentially could be really useful for scientists. You talk about transects, if you wanted to sort of go in and look exactly on one route, you could
Yep.
program that.
Yeah, and it can just repeat that. You can send it around infinite times until it runs out of battery.
And this repeatability is really, really key. So if you're trying to look at a change over time, and your drone is doing exactly the same route every time, it's being controlled by this predefined route, then you know you're getting exactly the same data every time, which allows you to make a really nice comparison. Whereas if you're doing it with people walking a transect, different people doing transects, walk at different speeds, hear different things. So it's a really nice tool in that respect.
So you then sort of download all the recordings and do you have to physically go through and sort of identify the bats, or is there software that can do that for you?
So there is software on the market which will do some automated recognition species classification. They tend to give you a probability, like the machine will say, I'm 80% sure it's this species, I'm 20% sure it's this species. They're a bit hit and miss. Some species are much easier to tell apart than others in the UK. So generally you might use that tool, but most of the time people will go through stuff manually to do that
It must
identification.
be quite exciting as well, you know, like, oh, what have we got? You know, let's see and record what we've got, apart from all the propeller noise, you know, when you find all those sounds coming out. There was a question at the front, yes.
It was just, is it not going to get blown off course? I mean, you were talking about repeatability, but is it actually repeatable? I mean, do you have, computers on board, or
Yeah.
are you sure that
So-
it's going to be on
So there's, they're a lot cleverer than we are when they're flying themselves. So there's a GPS on board, which is accurate probably to about 5 meters, and there's accelerometers and gyroscopes, so it always knows what attitude it's in as well, unless it's in a bad mood. Wind is, it can be a problem, but for flying a course within 5 meters, 10 meters maybe, I think you could pretty well nail that one.
Yeah, they handle wind surprisingly well. A note on that is that in high wind speeds it would be unsafe to fly a drone, and also bats tend not to fly in high wind speeds.
Just because I feel a bit bad of just showing videos of you guys crashing, I think it's only fair we show one of your glorious automated flights, and it's some fantastic footage from
This might be filmed straight after that other one. After the crash.
Yeah, that's probably when we put the camera in the right place.
Yeah. So the reason it crashed on the first one was because we put this camera on the back and then forgot to get the centre of gravity right again. So the plane's now heavier at the back. So then it kind of goes into a stall and fell out there. But luckily it crashed in this cornfield, which is like a natural cushion.
Yeah, which is fantastic. So it saved the plane and our glue cost.
It's going quite a long way. Are there any regulations at all in terms of how far away you can actually fly the drone?
Yeah, there's quite a few in the UK. So the CAA is the governing body that controls all this sort of stuff, and you can fly up to 500 meters away, provided that you still have visual line of sight. So you can't fly 500 meters away behind a building or behind a hill, or if your plane's too small so that you can't recognise which orientation it's in. You can fly up to, the actual limit is 1,000 feet, but you have to have a little camera on your plane if you want to do that. You have to have a spotter with you. If you're just by yourself, then you can fly up to 400 feet.
It's a long way. They've got an incredible range, haven't they?
Yeah.
There's a few questions coming up. Yes, we'll go back. Oh, no, let's take your question first. Sorry, go for it.
You said that the propellers produce high frequency noise. Does that not interfere with the bats? How do you know you're getting a representative sample of actually what they're doing?
Yeah, that's a good point. So because we've been so worried about that noise, we know a lot about how that noise from the motors varies with distance, because we need to know how long that technical bit of string is. So we know that after about 3 meters, with these new drones, which have quite quieter propellers than the original ones, we know that it's really quite quiet. In fact, it barely shows up on the detectors after about 3 to 5 meters. And bats, on the other hand, are like just 100-fold more louder than that. We also have flown the quad over some bats whilst they're foraging over trees, and we saw no change in their behaviour. It's something we need to look at in a bit more detail, but it's not something that we have major concerns about.
Next question. Yes.
So the noises that they're making, do males and females have different voices? And also, do they have individual sounds?
So there are studies which show that, so in some species, the male bats will sing to attract females, the harem-forming bats. So in that sense, the males have different calls, because a call is specific to attract females. As to whether or not an individual bat can tell the call of a specific other individual that it has some social relationship with, I don't think we know that.
One thing I've actually seen is when you place a baby bat that's been lost from its mother on the wall, sort of close to the mother. The mother will almost sort of call for it, and there does seem to be that relationship, which is reinforced with chirping. I'm not sure what is it called.
Calling.
Good question. Let's take. There was one up here somewhere. Or have you changed your mind? Or any more questions at all? Yes.
Is it not possible to actually, not sort of tailing against drones, but is it not possible to put any sort of detectors on the actual bats themselves to detect where they're going? To track them?
So we do. You can, yeah. So you can individually track a bat. You can put a radio transmitter on. So it's a very small little transmitter with a sort of whip antenna, and you glue it on with colostomy bag glue, so that it falls off after a certain amount of time, onto their back in between their shoulder blades, and then it just makes a little ping noise, and you go around with like a TV area, and you can track it and see where it flies at night and where it's recently during the day. It won't tell you the height. If you have two people, you can sort of triangulate its position in the landscape. So that's useful for trying to track an individual bat through the landscape. It's very intensive in terms of time, and you're only getting information on one individual bat for perhaps a 2-week period. Whereas what we're interested in here with the acoustics is getting information about all the species present in an area and what different species they are.
You've also been learning a lot from the mistakes, but also from your successes that you've been having. How have you been reporting on those? Are you looking to write a paper, or are you sort of just telling people as you go?
I don't think we're particularly fussed about writing a paper, although our main goal here is just to create the tool for other people to use. So we're really doing a feasibility study more than anything, more than trying to discover new species or doing work over canopy. So once we've kind of almost proved that these do work, and we've got calls now recorded from both the quadcopter and the plane. So in terms of very basic feasibility, yes, you can record bats from drones. But we're now looking to partner up with consultancies, for example, with research groups, and to find applications for this. So whether it's a research group that has a lot of data in a woods, for example, maybe like Wytham, where they've got lots of static bat detectors out there, they'd like to find out what's happening over the canopy. Or it could be a consultancy. They had one contact us a little while ago saying that, yeah, we do a transect survey in scrubland, and we have to go through with machetes and cut it all down in order to make a path. And we could do that, with the drone, no problem, just flying over that land.
And you've got a blog as well, haven't you, where you've been talking about these things.
So,
which is cool. So it's Project Erebus.
Project Erebus.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a bit abstract. Erebus is the Greek god of darkness, which is where we thought we'd be spending most of our time in the project.
But by actually writing about these things and by making very public things like that, the bat detector, the lightweight bat, people are now coming to and they're wanting to collaborate, and that's a really nice way of doing science that we don't actually, not everyone is doing, and it seems to have really come from, obviously it's very serious, but you seem to be just having a lot of fun as well.
I think the traditional way to do science would be you go out for 3 years, do this sort of stuff, and then you publish a paper and you get a bunch of credit for it. But that was never our driver. We did it to have fun, really, and so we just wrote a blog about it, put stuff on Facebook, and there were lots of people who were interested in what we were doing. And as you say, we wouldn't have had that breakthrough with the lightweight detector if we weren't telling people about what we were doing. We want this to be something that the community feels that they can chip into. If people got ideas, they just drop us a comment on a blog post or whatever. And so we have a lot of interaction with people who are interested in this sort of stuff. And as you alluded to, I think this is it's a newer way of doing science. Science is becoming more and more open. People call it open science. So people are much more open about what they're doing, much more willing to share data and share ideas. And we're just two ordinary guys who bought some drones and stuck some electronics to it. This didn't require someone in an ivory tower at an academic institute to do this. This didn't require a big grant from some government institute to do this. This is something that anyone could do. It just happens to be us who've done it.
It's true. Science can be a hobby, as well as a profession.
Well, historically it was. Darwin wasn't a professional scientist. Darwin was a clergyman, who did science,
and he did all right, didn't he?
He did pretty fat, didn't he? Yeah.
So what's the next steps then? Have you got quite ambitious plans now? More drones on the horizon, literally?
I don't think. Well, we built this quadcopter specifically to fly a lot longer than our old ones. This one flies for about an hour. And we bought this plane from China, which was a rip-off of the Lockheed Martin design, which is great that the Chinese do this. You can buy this for £80. Lockheed Martin one cost 10,000.
£80, really?
Yeah, just the frame. Yeah, and then you have the maintenance. So I think the plan is not to build any more drones right now, but to collaborate with people. Okay? Once we've got the tools, which we think that we do now, we need to go and prove that they can be useful and there are applications for them.
What about this wonderful thing? Is this just a
Princess.
hobby, or are you going to take to the water?
Oh, beautiful princess. This is an RC speedboat, so it's all kind of based on RC gear. And again, you can put in, it's called a flight controller, which is basically a computer that controls the autonomous or highly automated operation.
Sorry, I didn't know it was.
No, okay.
That's such loud music. Feel free to comment.
Okay. So we're not actually using it autonomously here. I'm just trying to buzz Tom. And there's a big rooster tail, it's called, that comes out back because the propeller splits. It's kind of half in the water and half out. So tons of water comes out, and I like this. This is Tom trying to save me as well.
But is there potential to stick a bat detector on this?
So we have stuck a bat detector on there, and we found that the boat is a lot quieter than things that fly. And we've taken it to the Thames and sort of driven up and down. The problem that we've had is that it's a speedboat. You know, it's meant to go really quickly. We're not fussed about going quickly. Walking pace would be absolutely fantastic. So at walking pace, it's got a very wide turning circle, which is so this is where we were in the Thames in Oxfordshire, and we had to get in the water quite a few times to recover it. I got in the water, yeah. Particularly one time at night where, so we set up the route, which is a transect along the river, just with waypoints along the river, and then you just do the waypoints back as well. And we don't know when we get to this point, when it's turning around, which way it's going to go, whether it's going to come to the near bank, where we're walking, or whether it's going to go to the far bank. And it went to the far bank, got stuck in some trees. And I got in at night at about 11 o'clock with my head torch on, attracting all the mosquitoes, which is quite an experience though, swimming at the Thames at night.
That was a real highlight for me as well.
Yeah.
You obviously enjoy what you're doing. It sounds like there's a lot more potential as well on water and on air. Before we finish, we'll take a few more questions. And are you happy to? Well, actually, you've got a stand, haven't you? Out in the Fossil Way, where people can actually have a go, a flight.
We've got a flight simulator, so feel free to come along and have a go at flying a plane or a quadcopter.
So if we don't get around to your question, do come and have a chat with Tom. He'd be happy to, I'm sure, to tell people more about your drones and bats. But we'll take a few first.
This issue with noise is bothering me. So this is an issue that they have in seismic processing. I don't know whether you guys have spoken to any that exists thus far.
Not yet.
But certainly this is the sort of issue that you have with seismic boats when they're acquiring offshore.
Okay.
And something that you handle both in terms of tuning the propellers, in terms of the frequency of noise that they generate, but also in terms of the processing. And obviously it's a bit different in terms of that because you've got multiple receivers, single source, control source, that kind of thing. But I just feel there should be a way to process it out.
Is that something that you work in?
I'm a seismic interpreter.
Okay,
So
perhaps we could have a chat about it afterwards.
Live collaboration, right?
There we go, this is how it happens.
This is the next talk happening, right? It's been wonderful. No, it's true, it's testament to actually talking about these things. And it sounds like a conversation to be had, certainly. Has anyone got any more questions? Yes?
Are you after particular bats, or are you just basically going, what the hell's out there? Please talk to me.
No, not after anything in particular. As Tom was kind of alluding to, it's a very general surveying method, so we're picking up anything that's out there. And we think it's a tool that, it's not just, it can't just be used in this country, you could use it anywhere in the world. And in particular, countries that have perhaps not as structured laws as we do, which have a bit more lax laws on drone use. It'd be fantastic because if you're flying this in the tropics or something, then you can cover maybe a 200-kilometre range with a plane, and you could get to areas that just haven't been surveyed before and see what bat species are there.
Before we finish, I think if people obviously don't have drones or maybe even bat detectors, are there ways that people can actually help record bats? Because it is really important in this country. We've seen a large sort of decline, general decline, so it's important to keep track of our bats. Are there ways that people can actually sort of go out and do it themselves?
Yeah. So there's big historic declines in bats simply because the habitats that bats like, we have a tendency to chop down. So bats really do need our help, and that's why all bat species in the UK are protected by law. The Bat Conservation Trust, they're fantastic. They're the main charity in the UK for the conservation of bats. This is their website. There's tons of resources there for kids, for how to have a bat-friendly garden. In fact, if you come to our store, we got some leaflets on how to sow a bat-friendly garden, get lots of insects in, that sort of stuff. You can do help with a monitoring scheme. You don't have to have a bat detector or be a bat expert to get involved in counting bats. So yeah, if you go there, there's loads of information and there's loads you can get involved with.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a fascinating introduction to you to bats and to drones and to sort of mixing them both together. Thank you ever so much, guys. We're going to leave it while we perhaps have a round of applause for these guys with one of my favourite videos. But yeah, thank you ever so much, guys. Sorry, I had to do this one. It's going well so far.
The propeller is turning this one, isn't it? Yep. That's still see the propeller turning from the light.
And on that note, another round of applause for Tom McCain.